Good morning. Good morning, everyone. If you please find your seats. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen and honored guests, good morning and welcome to this important gathering. I am Angelo Angelone. It is both an honor and privilege to stand before you today as the President and Business Manager of the Cement and Concrete Workers District Council. On behalf of our dedicated, hardworking members, I extend a warm welcome to each and every one of you. The purpose of this event is to delve into the findings of a report that holds immense significance, not only for the labor movement, but for the broader landscape of our greater city, New York. The report in question, titled Assessing Prevailing Wage Benefits to Workers, Contractors, and the New York City Economy, presents a comprehensive analysis of a topic that resonates deeply with us all: fair wages, the well-being of our workforce, and the prosperity of our economy. It is my honor to express our deepest gratitude to the Cornell staff who have been integral to the creation of this report. I would like to extend our recognition and thanks to Anne-Marie Brady, Russell Weaver, Patricia Campos Medina, and the entire Cornell staff, whose expertise and dedication have been instrumental in shaping the insights we are about to explore. As representatives of men and women working in the concrete construction industry in New York City, we recognize the pivotal role that prevailing wage laws play in safeguarding the rights of workers, ensuring fair compensation, and upholding the principles of equity and justice. The findings within this report shed light on the ways in which these laws impact not only individual workers, but also the responsible contractors who contribute to our city's growth and development. In the heart of this great city, we are fortunate to have advocates who champion the cause of workers' rights and unwavering commitment. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge New York District Attorney Alvin Bragg for his resolute enforcement of regulations that safeguard our workforce. Your dedication has been a beacon of hope for all of us who believe in justice, equitable treatment for every worker. I would also like to thank the New York City District Council of Carpenters, the Metallic Lathers Local 46, the Cement Masons Local 780, the Cement League, the Association of New York City's leading concrete contractors, CAGNY, the Contractors Association of Greater New York, for their contributions to this report. I also need to thank Eddie McWilliams and Mike Braun, who worked endlessly on this report. Today, we are not only here as advocates for labor rights, we are also here as partners in progress. This report has been crafted through collaborative efforts, a shared commitment to knowledge, and a collective dedication to enhancing the lives of workers and the prosperity of our city. Our partners in this endeavor have contributed their expertise and insights, shaping a document that will undoubtedly guide our conversations and decisions in the days to come. Additionally, I would like to express our appreciation to all of you who have joined us today. Your presence reflects your commitment to informed discourse, your belief in the power of collaboration, and your shared aspiration to drive positive change. Over the course of our discussions, let us remain open to the insights presented, the questions raised, and the potential solutions that may emerge. Through thoughtful deliberation, we have the opportunity to deepen our understanding of prevailing wage dynamics and their impact on our city's economic fabric. Prevailing wage laws stand as a cornerstone of our efforts to protect and empower our New York City's construction workers. These laws, along with other initiatives championed by both the city and state, continue to play a critical role in ensuring fair compensation and dignified working conditions. For instance, legislation A3350, A/S 2766C, makes construction contractors liable for wages owed to employees of their subcontractors, which became effective January of 2022. However, our industry faces its own set of challenges that we must address head-on. The lack of job opportunities for union construction workers has cast a shadow over our efforts to uplift our workforce. This issue underscores the importance of our collective endeavors to create an environment that fosters growth, empowers labor, and ensures a brighter future for all involved. As we move forward to our discussions, it is with great pleasure that I introduce Esther Bigler, who will offer introductory remarks on behalf of Cornell's ILR School. Esther's dedication to labor and employment issues aligns perfectly with the spirit of our gathering today, and we look forward to the insights she will share. Thank you for your presence, your commitment, your shared aspiration to drive positive change. Let us now transition to the presentation armed with knowledge, camaraderie, and a resolute determination to shape a better tomorrow. Thank you all.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Angelo, for getting our program started and sharing your insights as president of the Cement and Concrete Workers District Council. My name is Esther Bigler, and I direct the Labor and Employment Law program here at the New York State School of Industrial and Labor Relations. And I'm also, in another capacity, Director of Government and Community Relations for New York City. And in fact, that is the position that helped get this program started, with Mike Braun and I working together to think about what were the issues that needed to be evaluated and examined. So this program, I am thrilled with the number of people who cared about prevailing wages, care about the construction industry, and want to know more about this report and its implications for construction in New York City and construction in the state of New York. This collaboration between the ILR School and the cement industry is the best example of how ILR at Cornell, as an academic institution, does research as part of our mandate for outreach and extension, which was set forth for us by the New York State Legislature when we were created, for the betterment of New York State and New York City's economy, the betterment of its residents, its workers, its unions, and its employers. This study would not have been possible without the help of a few people I also would like to thank, Angelo. First and foremost, you, Angelo, as president of the Cement and Concrete Workers District Council. John Peters, the vice president of the Cement and Concrete Workers District Council. Ed McWilliams, executive director of the Cement and Concrete District Council. And Mike Salgo, the executive director of the Cement League. This would not have happened without all of your help and participation. I also want to thank our ILR researchers, Anne Marie Brady, who is the research director for worker rights and equity at the Worker Institute, and Rusty Weaver, who is the research director at the Buffalo CoLab, for their willingness to explore the possibilities of this research and maintaining, and this is important to me as an academic institution, and I think to you when you read the report, maintaining the academic rigorous standards in which we do our research, the standards in which our work is absolutely bound on. So that's important. I'm going to take you back in history for a moment. I'm not a historian. I don't pretend to be a historian, but I think this in some ways may set sort of a little bit of a context for some of the things we're going to talk about today. I'm going to take you way back. In 1911, the Triangle Waste Company, thank you, I'm a little tired, was a typical factory in the heart of Manhattan in what we would now call the Village. Low wages, sound familiar? Excessive long hours, unsanitary and dangerous working conditions. The doors were locked when people were working. Two women went to the owners to complain about the dangerous working conditions and talked about the doors being locked. while they worked. They were promptly fired. No union at the moment and no legal protections for what we would now call protected concerted activity. Many of the Triangle factory workers were women, some as young as 14. They were, for the most part, recent Italian and European Jewish immigrants who had come to the United States, as so many of our grandparents and parents have done, with their families to seek a better life. Near closing time on Saturday afternoon, March 25th, 1911, a fire broke out. By the time the fire was over, 146 young women of the 500 employees were dead. Many had died jumping out of a 9th floor window rather than be burned by the fire. The fire escapes were useless. The firefighters' ladders couldn't get up to the 9th floor, so no water was able to put out the fire. Inspections and precautions were woefully inadequate. The state had failed its residents and its workers in trying to provide a safe workplace. So, why am I telling you this seemingly irrelevant and unrelated story so early in the morning? It's barely 9 o'clock. This is a cautionary tale. What happens when government does not intercede on behalf of protecting its residents, its workers, unions, and its employers? What happens when we leave things to market forces and not to protecting the workforce and its own citizens? So in New York, at that point in time, while it was still not keeping many workers safe, I'm pleased to tell you that it was doing one thing in terms of safety, and that was prevailing wages. The first prevailing wage law in New York State was passed in 1897. Think what construction would be like today without prevailing wage laws. Kudos to the state legislature. The law then and now, with the increase in coverage of private sector projects funded 30% by government funds, has more than just an economic justification. It protects New York construction workers from being undercut by low-wage, often out-of-state contractors that may bid on large construction projects, which are very, very attractive, right? Taking away jobs from New York City and New York State residents, eroding working conditions for local residents, all of us in this room. In short, prevailing wage laws protect New York State residents from a race to the bottom in wages, benefits, and safety, adding hundreds of millions of dollars to the state's economy, substantially increasing New York State's and our local here in New York tax revenues. Just as important is that New York's prevailing wage law is also a workforce development policy, promoting apprenticeship, the gold standard in earn while you learn programs, providing an entry to good paying middle-class jobs, often for people who do not have a college education. The construction industry has been a pioneer in apprenticeship, developing contractor training programs for the entire industry. We know that in construction, workers move from one project to the next. Why would an individual contractor want to train me if tomorrow I'm going to your construction project? Not exactly cost effective to train somebody else's workers. However, in this industry, joint labor management apprenticeship programs paid for by collective bargaining agreements train people in an entire industry, carpentry, concrete, plumbing, etc. Through a several-year apprenticeship program, the apprentices gradually increase their skill level on the job and through related class instruction. New York State residents gave entry into good-paying middle-class jobs with health and pension benefits and safety by incentivizing contractors to use apprentices. It provides career opportunities. Contractors hire apprentices and they earn while they learn, who cost less than journey-level workers, while being trained by their journey-level colleagues. The New York State apprenticeship programs are monitored by New York State Department of Labor. I have seen the curriculum used in these programs on the job and in the classroom. The curriculum is well thought out and requires mastery at every step, including, of course, the related instruction that's provided. Frankly, and this is my opinion, I don't want to be in a building built by people called journey level, but who have not gone through the rigorous training and evaluation of skills labor management apprenticeship programs provide in our state. Before I introduce Rusty Weaver, I just wanted to alert you that at 11 o'clock, we will be finished, but many of you may be talking to each other, we hope, about the report. There will be a fire drill. Do not be concerned. It will be loud, but actually, having just mentioned the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, it is very, very appropriate. You may stay. The only people who have to leave to go to the elevators are the staff. So please do not get concerned and do not worry about it. So opponents of prevailing wage laws say it makes construction more expensive. It hurts workers, contractors, and the economy. I think this report tells us something else. And on that note, I would like to turn this over to Rusty Weaver, the research director at the ILR Buffalo Collab and the lead analyst on this study of data, which we know examines this very, very important question. Rusty, it's all yours.
All right, I'm gonna pull up a quick presentation for you here. And as that gets set up, I'll start by saying what research does, it doesn't build in the same sense that many of you here build, but what we try to do in a research process is build on prior results. Build on prior results in a way that asks new questions and allows us to explore new problems as we continue to learn more and more about a particular phenomenon. In this case, we're going to build on a lot of research because prevailing wage has been a popular topic throughout the years. As Esther said, we had our first law enacted here in 1897. Kansas beat us to it by about a year or so, but this has been a topic that has been under investigation for over 100 years. And while we could give you a very in-depth summary of the literature on this topic, we'll refer you to some of the early sections in the report for some of that. But the bottom line is a lot of state-by-state empirical analyses have found that when prevailing wage is taken into consideration on a project, it doesn't necessarily raise the cost of that project. We're going to take a slightly different angle. We're going to build on that 100-some years of results and analyses to think about at the firm level, whether or not a particular firm is going to face higher costs in a prevailing wage job relative to another. Now, as I said, what we try to do here is build on prior results. So I'm going to start here on this opening slide with some of those prior results. About a decade ago, the Regional Plan Association put out a study focused on New York City's construction industry. And one of the key conclusions in that report is that open shops, so non-union firms, tend to be about 20 to 30% less expensive than union shops. And so what we're trying to do in the course of this report are ask a couple of questions. Is this the correct assessment? Is this true, effectively? What could cause this type of a gap? And then how can prevailing wage laws affect this, again, situation or potential result? Now, as I get into this, into some of the background and then some of the findings that we were able to derive, I want to say, very importantly, this is a very small sliver of the research that we think can be done on this topic. Again, a good research project presents a case that leads inquiring minds to want to learn more. And so I'll wrap up throughout all of these reports with some questions that I think still need to be answered that we don't get to answer in the course of this report. But I think these three we can at least address in the course of our time here. So I'm going to start with, rather than thinking about is this assessment correct, we're going to ignore that question for right now. And we're going to move on to what could cause this gap, right? If open shops are really less expensive than union shops, why would that be the case? Well, number one, the research suggests, again, research that we're summarizing throughout this report, so you'll have access to all of the citations in that document if you were able to pick up a copy. But research suggests one key difference between union and non-union construction shops. One is the level at which they offer benefits. So this graph right here is from a study done by the Center for Policy Initiatives out of San Diego. This was a national study. And at the time, it showed that in union firms, about 90% of union construction workers receive health benefits through their employment, compared to about 61% of construction workers in non-union firms. More recent research shows that this gap might even be wider than it was estimated by the Center for Policy Initiatives. Leading prevailing wage expert nationally, Frank Manzo, recently put out a study up through 2020 that showed that union construction workers, again, tend to receive employment benefits about 89% of the time, compared to just 55% of non-union construction workers. Again, a wide gap. So this provision of benefits packages cost money, they're expensive. And so this could be one potential cause of why an open shop might be less expensive than a union shop. Another key here that I fortunately don't have a laser to point to, but in the first column of that table, very first two rows, we can see that on average in this study, Frank Manzo and his colleagues found that a union construction worker out-earns their non-union counterpart by almost $20,000 annually. Good wages, better benefits. These are two potential sources of expenditures that would lead to that first conclusion that we saw from prior literature, that open shops might be slightly less expensive than union shops. If we look at the third column in that table, the rate of pension plan access, again, in Manzo's study, he found that about 68% of union construction workers have a pension plan, compared to less than a quarter of non-union construction workers. What are some of the implications of this, right? Is that a good or a bad thing? Well, if you're a worker, it's good, right? Higher wages, better benefits mean that you're going to have more disposable income as a worker. You're going to be kicking more into your local economy. You're also going to be kicking more money into the state and federal coffers. In a continuation of Manzo's study, he found that between federal and state taxes, union construction workers pay about an extra $4,000 to $5,000 annually compared to their non-union counterparts. This puts revenue into federal and state programs that help folks who aren't in a position of a union construction worker to access benefits. I'm not going to belabor Manzo's research here, but later in this report, he also finds that union construction workers access Medicaid only about 3% of the time, compared to between 9 and 13% of non-union construction workers. So again, the union workforce, by paying more in taxes, are contributing to their non-union counterparts being able to get benefits. If we think about some other findings from prior research, this is a very recent report that just came out in 2021. And this is a finding that is repeatedly shown throughout the literature. It's not a single report, but I just like to capture the headline here. Union job sites are significantly safer than non-union job sites. The latest report on which this article was based showed that union job sites have about 34% fewer health and safety violations than their non-union counterparts. That research, that report also goes on to suggest that union firms tend to create higher quality products a lot of time too that stand the test of time. Right, so all of these benefits bringing together suggests one potential reason why we saw that early conclusion from the Regional Plan Association, that there's such a cost difference between open shop and union firms. Those sources of difference play out in different ways, but certainly the implication is that union construction workers have better earnings, they have better benefits, which cost money, they're creating higher quality products, and generally at a safer rate. So all of these things, this is a common sign, stole the graphic from the internet, so apologies. But the idea is that there are trade-offs between quality and cost. And what we're seeing in union construction jobs are that you're getting a high quality product at maybe, again, I'm going to stress that term for now until we get into our findings, at maybe a higher cost to the developer, but at a greater set of benefits to society when you're having workers who are, again, contributing more in tax dollars, who are able to meet their expenditures, who are able to pay for their housing costs and daycare and childcare and all of that good stuff. That extra $20,000 per year on average really helps meeting those expenses and having a certain standard of living. So if we move on and summarize all of this, which I've tried to do, but here I'll give it to you in bullet point format, right? A large body of research, again, there are plenty of citations in the report for you to check out, show that relative to non-union construction firms, union firms tend to pay their workers better. They provide nearly all of their workers with comprehensive benefits packages. They deliver high quality results with many fewer risks to workers' health and safety. And they actively train future workers, which I have a star here because I didn't actually say that one in any of the introduction. But as we detail in the report, the empirical literature on apprenticeship programs in New York State's construction industry show that apprenticeship programs are dominated by union shops. The most robust and widely used apprenticeship programs here, I didn't have enough coffee either apparently, are union built and union run. And as Esther said, I won't steal any of her thunder, this means that we're having a future in the construction workforce. This means that we see rigorous training of tomorrow's construction workers. Now, at the same time, compared to their non-union counterparts, union construction workers pay more in taxes, right? And that, again, is helping. Unions aren't just training future workers, they're helping current workers to access benefits that their employers aren't providing to them, right? So they're effectively helping to subsidize lower wage firms in this sense. And so with all of that being said, despite all of these advantages, right, on private development projects, at least up until January of 2022, there has been a preference to use non-union firms in a lot of cases because of that supposed cost differential, that 20 to 30% potential cost savings by going with an open shop firm. And so what we're arguing in this report and what we're researching and studying is whether or not strong prevailing wage laws would change this outcome. And how so? So we got a great overview of what prevailing wage laws are from Esther. So I won't go much deeper than what she already gave to us. But if we think about what are prevailing wage laws and why do we have them? Well, we have them because it's really easy for an out-of-region firm who pays their workers lower wages to come in, bid on a project, and have a lower price point. And that is, very often the deciding factor in who gets a contract, is who is the lowest bidder, right? That, unless it's off by orders of magnitude, the lowest bidder tends to get a lot of work. And so if that's the case, and we have out-of-region firms, we have capital mobility, firms can come in from different locations, bid on projects, we could see an undercutting of our local construction trades here. And so prevailing wage laws aim to prevent that. And the way they do that is by saying that if you're receiving public funds on a construction project, you need to pay your workers the prevailing wage rates. In New York City, and elsewhere in New York State as well, but at least here, prevailing wage rates are set based on union books, right? Union collective bargaining agreements become the source of prevailing wage laws for different trades. And these laws then say if you're receiving public funding now, as of January 22, even as little as 30% in public funding on a project, that you're paying your workers prevailing wages. And what that does, it's difficult to see in this graphic. But again, this graphic is just a summary of what prevailing wage laws are meant to do. They're meant to cut labor costs out of the equation, right? They're meant to say that assuming we have this job, most firms are going to agree that it's going to take a certain level of work to complete this job. So labor hours in different trades should be about the same across the board in all firms. Now, what tends to be different on non-prevailing wage jobs are what those workers are paid per hour. And so prevailing wage laws say, let's just factor that out. Let's make everybody pay their workers the same hourly wage, give them the same value of a benefits package per hour, and let's make them compete on quality, on technology, productivity, and other factors. And now that's not quite a race to the bottom, right? That's a race to the best product. So it goes against what Esther was saying is usually the reason for this, that we do tend to have this race to the bottom if we don't have prevailing wage laws. Now, in this report, the questions that we tackle are, is this really the case, right? Do prevailing wage laws completely cancel out labor costs for all firms, regardless of union or open shop? And the argument that we make here is that probably not, based on what we see from prior empirical results. Now, we could go much deeper here, We try to keep this simple in this report, again, as an opening conversation. That's why I say plenty more research can be done from this. But if we consider what labor costs are and we break that down, so it's not just one variable called labor costs, but it has some constituent parts, we can start to see that prevailing wage laws might create a union advantage. And what I mean by that, if we just break labor costs down into three parts: wages, benefits, and taxes and insurance. Here we focus just on one type of insurance costs, workers' compensation insurance, right? There might be some differences between union and non-union firms based on the rate at which we see open shops providing their workers with benefits. If you recall that very first graph I showed you, two-size buildings basically, a high multi-story and a one-story building, where about 90% of union construction workers are receiving health benefits from their employment, compared to maybe as little as 55% of non-union construction workers. That's going to play a role in what a firm pays in its workers' compensation insurance policy. The way workers' comp is calculated, it's based on payroll, right? So a workers' compensation premium is really rooted in two key variables. What is your payroll, and what is your firm's history of safety and experience levels, right? So these are two key variables and a jumbled mess of mathematical equations here, right? So when a firm is trying to purchase a workers' compensation policy, it needs to figure out what its payroll is, which is a combination for a lot of firms of fringe and wages. But one key factor in workers' comp calculations is that your qualified payroll for a workers' comp premium doesn't include any fringe that goes into group benefits. And here's the key difference. Non-union firms, if they're not providing a lot of their employees with group benefits, are going to have to pay, in prevailing wage law parlance, what's called a supplemental rate. That supplemental rate is New York State's way of saying, if firm A isn't providing its workers with comprehensive pension, health, and other benefits, we're going to take the value, the hourly value of, again, in New York City's case, a union pension plan or a union benefits package, and we're going to make firm A pay that hourly rate to their employees on top of the prevailing wage that they're getting. Now, when that happens, again, in theory, that means that a worker at a non-union shop gets that extra money and they can go out and purchase on the private market equivalent benefits to what their union counterparts are getting. Do they always do that? Maybe not. That gets paid in wages, right? And if that's extra income, you're spending that on whatever you need to spend it on at that point in time, to make sure that your day is going smoothly, to make sure that you're paying your bills, the water is on, the rent payments is paid, and all of that good stuff. All right, so where that matters is that if non-union shops are having to pay that supplemental rate to a lot of their workers, to most of their workers in general, based on, again, some of the empirical findings that we're building this on, that means that their payroll is actually going to be higher than a union firm's, because unions provide, again, comprehensive benefits to almost all of their workers. Those group benefits get subtracted out of a workers' comp premium payment. So to test this, right, to see if this really makes a difference, or if it's just pocket change that we're talking about in this case, we worked with the Cement League to get some actual data on the number of hours in 4 different trades that were required, or part of a bid for a recent project at 57 Marcus Garvey Boulevard. When we pull that information in, we're going to be able to see, again, based on observable differences in benefits rates between open shops and union firms, whether this workers' comp payment, again, just one dimension of insurance and taxes, there are more here, so there are potentially even more savings than what we get into. But we're going to see if that makes a difference in workers' comp insurance payments. And apart from that, we're going to consider one other variable. And that other variable, again, as Esther alluded to in her opening remarks, is apprenticeship. As I said, all of the research on New York State's construction apprenticeship programs really emphasize the fact that most apprenticeship programs, or participants in apprenticeship programs, are union shops. And there's a big reason for that, right? The big reason is that in their collective bargaining agreements, there is generally a line for the amount of cents per hour that every worker is contributing to an apprenticeship training program. It's institutionalized. Apprenticeship is something that the workforce is paying for and helping to create, so that union shops are, again, training the future construction workforce. It's much more expensive and not very cost effective for open shops to provide those programs because their workers generally aren't the ones paying for it. And so unions realize these economies of scale to create large, robust apprenticeship programs. And what does that do? It gives them access to, forgive me, this is a terrible way to say this, but I haven't had enough coffee this morning. It gives them access to lower cost labor, right? Apprentices generally earn less than their journeyman counterparts. And so that can introduce a second considerable cost savings for union firms on a prevailing wage job. Again, assuming that open shop firms aren't going to have the same access to that lower sort that source of lower cost labor, excuse me. So with that being said, how did we approach this? Well, we built a calculator. We built a calculator where we can input the number of hours worked by each trade represented by the Cement League, 4 different trades, which represents really the bulk of concrete work that happens on a construction project. We allow a user to input the hours in each trade, the fraction of those hours that can be worked by apprentices based on the ratios that are encoded in law. And then we look at the differences in benefits provision for open shop and union firms, and we come up with calculations by trade and then sum together to think about what the cost savings might be using a union shop rather than an open shop on a prevailing wage job. I don't have access to show you this calculator in action on this screen, so these are just a couple of snapshots, but in a post-event email, we will drop a link to you if you want to play around with it. What it asks us for, it asks us to set rates of what are called experience modification rates, which the insurance industry uses to determine firms' risk of seeing an injury on a job, basically, and it goes directly into their workers' comp calculation. So we allow users to play around with those experience modification rates. We ask you to set the fraction of open shop workers that receive benefits from their employer. So you can imagine maybe a really high road non-union employer that's kind of an oxymoron that's offering all of their workers deep comprehensive benefits packages, or you can assume that they're not offering benefits packages to any of their workers. And you can play with anything in between. And then you can go trade by trade to input the number of hours required for your given job. And eventually the calculator will spit out what the cost differences are, assuming that both firms use the same amount of labor. Right? Again, that's the point of a prevailing wage law. All firms are using the same amount of labor on a job. It should cost both firms the same. In wages, it often does. In insurance and taxes, it often doesn't. And so we built this calculator, and then our analyses basically performed sensitivity analyses and some simulation to figure out what the cost savings might be working with a union shop on a prevailing wage project in New York State or New York City. We looked at a range of 5 different scenarios, from really conservative, where there are no apprentices available to the union firm, all the way up to more lax assumptions that you're competing against an open shop that only gives benefits to, say, 1/3 of its workers, and a union shop not only gives benefits to most of its workers, but also has access to apprentice labor. When we model these scenarios, we find that there is a cost savings, again, just on these 2 dimensions, workers' comp insurance and apprenticeship labor, that ranges from about $100,000 for this particular job, the hypothetical 57 Marcus Garvey building, about $100,000 or about a 1.3% savings in the most conservative case, all the way up to about an $800,000 savings or about a little over 15% in the 5th scenario that we modeled. In the median situation, which is based on, again, empirical observations of the rate of benefits that non-union construction workers have, we find a median scenario is a cost savings of about 13% on this hypothetical job. And so the conclusion is really that prevailing wage laws do seem to make union labor a little bit cheaper than non-union labor because of the vast differences at which a union shop versus an open shop provide their workers with comprehensive benefits. And so what that means is if union firms are able to win more work through prevailing wage laws or the recent changes to prevailing wage jobs, that can have an upward spiraling effect in society, because more work for union jobs means that more workers are earning higher wages, are getting better benefits, and are paying more in taxes, like we talked about early on. It means that those firms then are potentially making more profit and can hire on more workers. That means more workers contributing to, say, an apprenticeship program, kicking in more money to train the future workforce. And eventually that should start to put some upward pressure on open shops to begin matching the offerings of union firms to compete for work if they tend to lose out to union firms due to these cost-saving potentials. So what are some of the implications? Well, why might union bidders be losing jobs? This is something that we've heard anecdotes of in the course of our research on this project. That 20 to 30% open shop discount is still happening, right? They're still getting underbid even on prevailing wage jobs. Well, in our research, we uncovered maybe 3 reasons for that. One is there could be substantial differences in those other elements of competition, productivity, material, technology, all of that. But the other 2 are implications where policy changes or stronger enforcement can really bring a difference. And one is, again, we've heard anecdotes of this. The next step in this research is to start making FOIL requests and to start finding out answers to these questions as well. But another one is that non-union firms or open shops might be underbidding to win a contract. But then we see change order requests throughout the course of that project, leading to cost overruns. And so is there really a savings after all of that? Again, that's the next step for research along these lines. The other is an enforcement question too. There could be misclassification of workers by non-union bidders, say classifying someone as a general laborer, but assigning them to carpentry work for the day, meaning that that firm is saving money, but the worker is losing out. Right? And so these are the 2 implications that really call for stronger enforcement or stronger monitoring, which fortunately in New York City, we've seen a lot of progressive changes toward that end. And so the key conclusion here is that based on these findings, again, we can open the door to a lot more research on this topic. But the key conclusion that we reached is that based on the observable differences between firms and the benefits that they offer, it should save developers money on prevailing wage jobs to work with union firms. Again, if everything else is equal, if all firms are using the same amount of labor to complete a job, we should see an advantage by going with a union firm. And that in turn could have that upward spiraling effect that we talked about, putting upward pressure on wages and standards throughout the industry. So that is all I've got for you. Thank you very much. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Anne-Marie.
Thank you so much, Rusty. That was amazing. I feel very lucky today to introduce our panel. Thank you very much, first and foremost, for joining us this morning. We have with us Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. We have Ainsley McGuire, General Counsel of the Contractors Association of Greater New York. Welcome. We have David Caraballoso, I got it, Vice President of the New York City District Council of Carpenters, and of course we have Rusty Weaver. We thought what we would do today with this section of this segment of our program this morning is open up to a wider panel of people who interact with prevailing wage laws at different levels within the construction industry and get their perspective on the one hand on the report and its findings, but on the other hand, speak to some of the larger issues that Rusty brought up in his presentation, of course, that Angelo and Esther spoke to earlier as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a question for each panel member, and that will lead to further larger discussion amongst the group, and then we'll close with a few questions from the audience as well. So DA Bragg, I'd like to start with you if you don't mind. New York State Labor Law Section 224A went into effect on January 1st, 2022. From your perspective as the Manhattan District Attorney, what is the importance of the change to the law to the New York City economy, the labor market, workers and their communities on the one hand, but also, on the other hand, what opportunities does this law pose for your office and what challenges?
All right. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Feeling humbled, but my mom was a mathematician. So when I saw those math formulas go up, it was brought back my youth. So I'm happy to broaden it to sort of a lane that I know a little bit better. But thanks to all of you who are doing such important work. That's the underpinning. In terms of the question, it creates great opportunities for us. And I did my first prevailing wage case, seems like now, years and years ago, when I was a federal prosecutor in the kind of mid 2000s, and everything that we're talking about, sadly, kind of the same issues that we're facing. In fact, the history lesson of 1911 reminds me of a case that we charged a couple of weeks ago, where a worker was locked in. There was no fire, thankfully. So in some ways, we're seeing the same issues over and over again. And so expanding the scope of where we as enforcers can come in. So not just sort of a traditional prevailing wage case, but the types of projects that we're now eligible for that really is a great opportunity for us in terms of enforcement, for all the reasons that have been mentioned, right? Sort of leveling the playing field between those who are following laws and those who are not just the wage benefits, which are obviously important, but also the safety, which we see in our enforcement work go really hand in hand. The same employers who are paying criminally low wages often are creating very unsafe work environments. So great opportunities in terms of enforcement, and we've got people in the room who are very good about sending us cases. That's how we get a lot of our work, allegations for folks who are sort of really, so to speak, boots on the ground. In terms of challenges, these are not easy cases to bring, and we have our great staff who are building the cases. I would embarrass them, make them stand up, but then they may not talk to me. But these are hard cases to build. I know that from working with them and seeing their hard work and genius every day, and then from having built them myself. So the ways that we can sort of help and partner is sort of the documentation, the kind of contemporaneous record keeping, which does put an onus on the workers, but makes our cases is easier to build when we have kind of cleaner records. So that I see in terms of that's a little kind of nuts and bolts, but that's the challenge for us is opportunity for cases to bring important cases, but they're hard cases. They take time. We need to be methodical. We're building up and increasing the resources for the unit. I guess what I would say to those who are mindful of kind of working with us, the record keeping in real time is so important to case building for us.
Great, thank you very much. Ainsley, let's turn it over to you. As General Counsel for the Contractors Association of Greater New York, you represent union contractors. How does the expansion of the prevailing wage law impact union and non-union contractors on the one hand? Yes, we'll just start there. We'll stop, yeah.
Well, what I love about this report personally is that it took a lot of ideas that have been floating around in my head and put them in a nice, orderly fashion. We know that the city and generally our society benefits from people earning a good middle-class wage. And we know that unions have better training programs, so we know that they're safer. And we know that the workers are better served by having a safe environment. Construction is inherently dangerous. And so we don't want labor cost to be what drives the building in this city. This is a densely populated city. It is not easy to build here. It's very complicated to build in New York City. So you want to make sure that you have the best trained workforce doing the work. And what this law does is, as the report showed, really should eliminate labor costs from the equation. So it really should be leveling the playing field. And we know that if workers do not have benefits, then we as a society are paying that price through our taxes, through subsidies, through, however else we pay for it. So having that removed from the equation allows us to be on a level playing field. And when we're on a level playing field, a union workforce is the workforce that you want. So that's hopefully what the prevailing wage laws will be doing. And the expansion will help get more projects built more safely and better quality.
Okay, thank you, Ainsley. David, from your vantage point as the New York City District Council of Carpenters, why have you and your members been so supportive of strengthening the prevailing wage laws? And what do these changes mean to you and your members, both in the short term and the long term?
Well, I guess the best way for me to explain it is related to my life. So I have about a little over 30 years in the construction industry. 2/3 of that has been with the union. Third has been non-union. And for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to refer to prevailing wage, a living wage, and an area standard wage as one and the same. So that being said, grew up in Manhattan. I still live in a neighborhood where I grew up. I live in market rate housing, private housing. I have a kid in college. I'm able to pay for that. So one less tax on the society. Another kid who's like myself, dyslexic, so he's kind of going through some special programs. I'm able to fund that. Less reliance on the social systems for that. Also, the community that I live in, I'm able to fully engage in the local economy. I can use, as you can tell, I can use the barber, right? So I also occasionally am able to take the family out to a local restaurant. I use the local laundry. I'm also able to contribute to, I have another child who's in public school. So not all the kids that are in public school are as fortunate as my son. So my family's able to contribute, monetarily, be it through school supplies for the other kids. So it really has a far, far reaching impact. It really, when you connect all the dots, it touches pretty much every aspect of our society. So training is a huge part of the unions, and the living wage is something that allows us to do the training. You go to war with the army that you have. So after 9/11, what happened? The unions got together. They were skilled. They were trained. They all went. They jumped on the pile. And they fixed it. I wasn't in the union at that time. I came in 2004. I was able to go to work on rebuilding the building. So again, you go to war with the army you have. We had an extremely trained workforce that hit the ground running. And recently I heard something around 50 million work hours were generated at the site down there. 0 fatalities. That's an incredible thing. That's a testament to how well the training force or the workforce is. Fast forward, Hudson Yards, another major project. Again, you go to war with the army you have. The unions got together. See what the Hudson Yards, what the result is from that. So it touches every aspect of society. It really is a boon to your neighbor. It's a boon to the government because there's a bigger tax base. There's less use of affordable housing or next to none. Less social services, which are out there now for the people that need them. That being said, again, I wasn't always in the union. So this is why it's so important that we have a prevailing wage. And not only that, but it's actually enforced. So like I said, for about 1/3 of my life, I worked non-union. There I worked on several prevailing wage projects, documented. This isn't he said, she said story. This is something that I observed and was reported to the Inspector General's office. So what happened? So I worked at the Bronx courthouse garage, if I remember correctly. This is going over 25 years ago. I worked at the Larchmont train station for Metro North. I also worked at several SEA project schools in the Bronx. While I was there, I worked alongside with other individuals, great guys. A lot of them became good friends of mine that were undocumented. They did not receive the prevailing wage. I did not receive the prevailing wage. As a matter of fact, one day I got a paycheck, and at the bottom of the paycheck was a number. It was like $382. So I had heard, within the company that there's people who are kicking back to the company. I never did, so I kind of took it with a grain of salt. But now I see this dollar amount on my paycheck. So I go over to the boss and I go, hey, what's this? And he goes, you've been working a lot of overtime. Say, something you give back to the company to help the company out. And I'm like, Khalid, I'm not going to pay this. So shortly after that, long story short, I was organized and I was able to get out of there. And, the company had their issues. And to some extent, I regained some of the monies, but most people there were undocumented, unfortunately, so they kind of took off running. They didn't claim what was theirs. And at the end of the day, you never recover what you lose. So those are the two sides of it. That's the comparison that I have in my personal experience. So that's why, obviously, our members are big on this.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Rusty. You talked about the need for additional research. What types of data do researchers need to monitor the enforcement of prevailing wage on the one hand, but then to understand the implication of the prevailing wage law and its impact across a range of indicators such as the benefit to the local economy, the well-being of workers, including safety, wages and benefits training, which of course then impact the community?
It's a big question. So for folks who have been working on this project, I see Mike Salgo and Mike Braun here, Eddie, this project evolved, right? So we initially looked at this project as a way to try to answer some of those questions and ran into roadblocks with access to data. Specifically, a lot of bid data is closed, right? So when contractors are bidding on a project, unless you win the contract, the public isn't necessarily ever going to see the results of the bidding process, which can be fine for protecting trade secrets or things like that. But it makes it almost impossible to analyze the differences between a winning bidder and, say, the second or third bidder in the queue. And for that reason, it's hard to pinpoint why exactly there might be a 20 to 30% difference, say, between a union shop and an open shop, without being able to see how much they're bidding on, the number of hours that are required for the job by trade and things of that sort. And so, as I mentioned at the outset of our presentation of the results, there is an opportunity to use freedom of information laws to begin to understand some of those closed data sets right now and to begin to incorporate them into this research and further test the implications of what we've found so far. In terms of monitoring and enforcement, so firms that do win prevailing wage jobs have to submit certified payroll. That is, again, something that data analysts and researchers generally don't have access to, however. And so these are things I know that there's a balance to strike. There's a tension between keeping some data private versus making sure it's public. But on an issue like this, when the public is pitching in for up to 30% or even more of a private development job, then I think it is incumbent on us to demand more data from that firm to be able to see that all of the agreements that they've committed to in terms of paying their workers the prevailing wage and ensuring that their workers are going to have the same standards of living as a typical union worker. These are things that the public should have access to. So it's not an answer that I have that's very straightforward on how do we get from here to there. I think it's going to take some experimentation through researchers doing that hard work of making the FOIL requests to the point where the value that's captured through those studies might pave the way for a broader democratization of that data.
Thank you, Rusty. I want to talk a bit more about enforcement because a law is only so useful until it's enforced or it has the ability to be enforced. Ainsland, I know that for union contractors, sorry,
It's like, that's going to him, but.
well, it's going to all of you actually. So I have a general question, but I'm going to start with you, Ainsland. I know that for union contractors you represent, enforcement of the law is critical to their success, right? Have you seen the enforcement of the law? Have you seen enforcement of the law change the landscape within which you operate? So does it level the playing field? And if so, how? And if it hasn't, what more needs to be done?
Well, I think we're beginning to see that. As hopefully you all have read, the district attorney's office and Alvin Bragg have created a task force, and they've been very active. And there have been a number of companies that have been indicted in the past several months. And what the impact of that for union contractors we hope to see is that when we're bidding, and as again the report mentioned, the underbidding can be done because you anticipate you're not going to pay your workers, right? If you're anticipating that I'm going to misclassify some workers, I'm not going to pay David, and then even if I do pay David, I'm going to get some money back. So I can, submit a very low bid. And with enforcement, if we see that those contractors that are doing that and therefore are getting work are being challenged legally and their workers are not properly classified, so they have violated prevailing wage laws, they've not paid workers' wages, they've violated prevailing wage laws, they've not paid the benefit, the wage supplement, they're violating, then enforcement comes in, takes those companies that are undercutting good contractors, takes them out of the playing field, and people start to get the message, more importantly, that if I'm going to bid on a prevailing wage job, I better make sure that I'm doing it right, because if I don't, the DA's office is going to come after me.
Do you have anything to add to that?
So what I think that and we think about this in, across our work in terms of sort of deterrence, and particularly I think in the sort of white collar space, the general thought is that there's ability to get more deterrence. Essentially, you talk about sort of getting the word out, which is not something I think as prosecutors we traditionally think about doing the cases, but it is so key because we want to do the cases and then have the marketplace know, so that the marketplace responds. I've done both kind of civil enforcement in a sort of prior role at the New York State Attorney General's office, and I think that work was very, very important. And what I think is really important about the criminal enforcement, and maybe stating the obvious for the room, but with the civil enforcement, it's people can price that in, right? So you can do work unlawfully for a long time, and we can try to make people whole, and with liquidated damages and the like, can come close to that. Although, as you said, you'll never be restored to your initial position, but no one prices in like going to jail. I shouldn't say no one, but it is far less frequent. So I think that the criminal enforcement, and I'll give credit to the work. The DA's office has been active in this space for a long time. We're trying to deepen that engagement, and also we do a lot of cases that I think get attention, that have sort of the big dollar amount. I also think, and this is not in the prevailing wage case context, but I think they interact. We've done recently a number of smaller dollar cases, which I think are really important and send a message to other parts of the marketplace. There's sort of nothing sort of below the line, like, oh, this was a small project, and so no one was paying attention. And we've seen very, very significant worker safety. I mentioned the sort of worker being locked in. We have another case we charged $7,000. The worker was assaulted when he demanded his wage. So we are certainly want to be active in the prevailing wage space, but more broadly, I think kind of sending messages to the workplace that you can't steal wages, you can't hurt workers, and certainly some of that conduct will be civil, and we'll send that to partners, but some of it will be criminal. And I think that enforcement is something that, except for the most egregious actors, is not something they contemplate when they engage in the act. So we think it's important. We're going to continue to do it. We're going to continue to build it and do more and more of it. And hopefully, we'll get the deterrent effect. I mean, that's the goal, right? We don't want to just do the cases to do the cases. We want to get the conditions fixed. We want to get it so that the marketplace is responding. And so I hope, and I don't want to add to the research list, but I was sitting there thinking, like, I have sort of 20 plus years of prosecutorial experience that I bring to bear, but this might be an interesting research question, right? The sort of the stepped up enforcement, and how does the market respond? So I don't know, maybe there's a partnership there.
This raises, I think, an interesting question, though. On the one hand, how this law is perceived by different sectors within the construction industry as a whole. So I'm thinking, of course, of the developers on the one hand, the financiers on the other, the workers, the contractors, union and non alike. Can any of you speak to your experience engaging with these different elements of the construction industry and their response to expansion of the prevailing wage law and some of the specific work you've been doing to address wage theft and misclassification of worker and worker safety, which, as you rightly say, are elements that play into that make up the larger picture of prevailing wage and leveling the field.
I'm going to say that I believe that most of our contractors are going to welcome it because it's going to provide them more opportunity. They're going to be undercut less. For example, one of the contractors that I work for, as a result of the investigation, it was determined that he had like $1 million plus in overruns. So he underbid everyone, knowing that he was going to try to make up the difference in extras. So I think that it puts our contractors in a better place. And for the most part, the reception that I've seen is that it's welcomed and it's about time, actually. And the enforcement part, again, is extremely big.
Can you speak to that a little bit more? Extremely big in what way?
In the sense, other things that I've seen is we were installing without lathers, by the way. I know the lathers are in the room. The people were being misclassified, so we were installing rebar, and it was coated with galvanizers. Galvanized, which means it's a rust inhibitor, protects the rebar. So when we couldn't get the galvanized, they painted the rebar a color that looked like the galvanized, and they'd install it as galvanized. Another way, so if there was more enforcement, you might have more oversight, which would have prevented things like this, and again, would have made the good contractors more competitive.
Where does that have to come from? You say more enforcement.
That is going to have to come from, I guess several is going to have to come from the building agencies. It's going to have to come from the agencies that oversee, for example, the School Construction Authority, or it's going to have to come from the Metro North, that, just comparing them to the projects I was on. So it's going to have to come from several different places, at least those two.
More resources. Ainsley or
I think,
DA?
I mean, there's a cost, right? I mean, that's part of what this report shows us, that there's a cost. And it doesn't always just translate to the dollar bottom line. And so you have to look at a multitude of factors to determine what the true cost is. And I think there's been recently a perception that there's nothing about union labor that makes it worth the cost. And I think what we're seeing is that that's not true. And hopefully this law expands the amount of work being done, and then the amount of work in which union contractors can be competitive and get more union workers working, because there's perception and there's reality. If the perception is that regardless of what we say, that union contractors are more expensive, then that is, that's a perception we have to overcome. And this report and the follow-up and the information that we're talking about is going to be critical to changing that perception and to making it clear that when we're submitting bids to owners and developers and to agencies, that here is the real cost, here are the real numbers, here's what this really looks like. And all of this information, helps us do that. And then the more union contractors that are getting work and more that are delivering that message, then hopefully we'll start to see this domino effect, and add the enforcement component to that and the deterrent effect of underbidding and misclassification and all of that. Hopefully we have a perfect storm that ends better than the movie did.
I'd like to add to that. So there's other costs that are uncoupled from the prevailing wage, but ultimately it's going to cost the government. So when you don't provide healthcare through the job, you're going to provide it through some type of social service. People are going to get sick more often, that they can't take care of themselves, they can't work as often, so there's a cost. It's all related. We're going to figure out how we couple the other expenses that the government, for affordable housing. People can't afford their housing, the government's going to fit part of the bill, if not all of the bill. So we got to find a way to merge the costs so you can see not only the cost savings on the project, but the rest of the fiscal savings you're going to have across the city.
I feel like in a lot of enforcement situations, the burden falls to the individual, right? And you're dealing with workers who are possibly in very precarious situations. And so speaking up, it becomes very difficult. So I'm coming back, DA Bragg, to your original point that that you need good documentation, you need to bring the cases forward, but ultimately that the first step is the worker coming forward and expressing any type of grievance that is taking place. Is there any way we can alleviate that burden from the individual in this process? Or does it always have to fall to the individual?
So I think we can, through kind of investigative tools, make it sort of dispersed a little bit. I mean, ultimately, right, if a case goes forward, we're going to, have the need, most likely, for testimony, whether at the grand jury stage when we're presenting it for an indictment or later down the road for a trial. As we all know, the just listening to David talk, it's compelling, right? So if you're going to present this to a jury, you want workers speaking. So I think in some ways it's unavoidable. And again, I would say this is something that kind of pervades our work. You can think about a domestic violence case, a sexual assault case, a robbery. I mean, we are, unfortunately, it's a component of our work that we're calling on people who've been, the victims of crime to come forward. And it is taxing, and we have resources in our office to try to make that less taxing, but it is a component. With these kinds of cases, I think what can be helpful is the use of what people may think of, investigative tools and sort of a violent crime enterprise or a drug trafficking conspiracy, other ways to sort of corroborate. So it sort of, I think, lessens the need, and in some cases may obviate altogether. So I've had cases where, if you're trying to, show the number of people, at a work site, easy way to do that would be a worker. That worker could be cross-examined. If you have, whether it be someone who's worn a camera or a camera installed to capture that, that's helpful. We have a number of investigations where we're using, wiretaps. Therefore, you have the audio and the intercepts. And so things that can buttress or corroborate, I think, make it easier for us as a matter of proof, but then also easier in some ways on victims who come forward. But I don't want to minimize it, because I think the act of coming forward is a courageous one and a hard one. And then our job is to support folks who do that and make that very challenging step, one that we are acknowledging the significance and the challenge in it, but then try to support them through that. And we do that, and I think the office does a very good job of that across a broad spectrum of crimes.
Okay, great, thank you. I think what we'll do at this point is turn it over to the audience. I'm sure there are many questions. Great, hands are raised. Let's just go this way. We'll start with you. Maybe what we'll do is take 3 questions and then respond to them. Does that sound good? Okay.
Good morning. I'm so blessed to be in your presence. Thank you so much for everything that you've done so far. Mr. Bragg, yes, let's clap it up for him. You're serving democracy. Thank you. So back to my question. As I sit here and listen to what's happening, I'm an educator, and you're talking about the undocumented workers. We have ignored a workforce that is right here, that is a systemic problem. There are young African-American men and women and Hispanic men and women who are not properly educated and trained and steered toward these particular jobs. There are obstacles for them getting into unions. And my first thought when I first, started hearing the panel was that maybe New York can set a precedence. If we need living wages and benefits, why don't all workforces become unionized so that they can be regulated and that everyone has the right treatment and the right living standards?
Hallelujah. I agree. Hi, my name is John Rappaport. I'm with Component Assembly Systems. We're the largest drywall contractor in New York City. Is that correct, David? Maybe
One
second.
of them, yes.
Maybe second. But the thing is not always it being first. It's being right. It's doing the right thing. And again, DA Bragg, all power to you. Let's give him a hand again. What an amazing person. Keep it up. But David, you do so many great things for the Carpenters Union. I want to thank Eddie McWilliams for inviting me here. It's so important the union works with Cornell ILR to do this. So we report our wages certified. We could share, Rusty, with you what we're doing. We track in our own software how we have wage tasks that are tracked and who gets paid what to do those tasks, not just apprentices. We built the World Trade Center, One World Trade, and the museum after cleaning up the site. 9/11, same carpenters came back. My dad still runs the firm. He's 86 years old, Lou. Our first job was at the World's Fair for $139, 1964. And here we are. We did the African American Museum in Washington. I could go on and on, but this is a solvable issue. It's a data problem. You don't have the data. Local Law 44, HPD, tracks data. That was a law passed by the city council that was vetoed by Mayor Bloomberg. You would think, as a data man, he would want that data. He vetoed it because of the Rebney people, and they're in this building. When I came in, Rebney was on the outside, and they should be supporting this, but when they were against the prevailing wage law. Also, NYSAFA is against this, the affordable housing industry. They fought to have local law 44 not enforced, and they sued. The reason I mention this, there is data out there, Rusty. Look for HPD's data, local law 44. The DOL of the U.S. has just upgraded their Davis-Bacon tracking, and I could certainly work with you and show you what they're doing. You have to modernize the tracking of data. It's very simple. And to tie in the wage classification. Now, who's not here today? The number one person in this is Controller Lander. I do not see him here. He's the fiscal officer of New York City. He'd be the one that would track these wages correctly. He has to be in these conferences. And same with DiNapoli from New York State. The controller controls this situation. Let's be honest. DA Bragg, you're ahead of things, but we're after the fact with you. There's a lot of this stuff can be cleaned up before it comes to your office, and you could do things
Okay.
that are beyond
Do
that.
you have a question?
My question is, how are you going to track these? Yeah, my question is, what is the plan? The GCA has not always been in favor of this, and I do like your dad. I'm assuming is Ray McGuire, but I don't know that for sure. The thing is that the association has not always been in favor of labor tracking, as you're telling, that would actually know what is the real wage, not the prevailing wage as the union rate. It's not always that.
Okay,
So
thank
what is the
you.
real wage? How do you intend to track it?
Thank you.
GCA is the question.
One more question.
No, GCA. I asked her that.
Yeah, I'm taking 3 questions.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for the panel. Shane Sapini. I'm an ILR School alum, and I own an employee rights law firm. And we do a lot of civil wage theft enforcement ourselves. But one of the things that we don't have potential clients calling about is prevailing wage claims. And so I'm wondering, how does a non-union employee figure out what the prevailing wage is for a project and if they're being paid that wage or not? Is that posted somewhere? Is it written anywhere for them to figure out, or how does that work? Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll take these 3 questions and then we'll open it back up to the audience. So we have questions about precedent in New York City, New York State. We have an issue with the data problem and tracking the appropriate data to answer these important questions. And then we have a question about whether or not to the degree to which workers know their rights, non-union workers know their rights. And if they don't, how can they access that information? Who would like to start?
So the easiest one is the last one. So yes, it's supposed to be posted, but again, they're also supposed to pay the proper wages. So the law does require you to post the prevailing wage rate and to have information about whom to call. And that should be posted at every job site that's a prevailing wage job site.
One of the issues with that is some of them actually know that they're being underpaid, but they don't feel like they have options. So because of that, they suck it up and deal with it because they want to work. So.
And I think one of the other issues is that I don't think the postings say, but somebody who might know better can correct me. It doesn't say that even if you are not legally authorized to work in the US or New York City, that you can still pursue a wage claim. And then, with respect to your question, I'm not sure I fully understand it. When we are on a prevailing rate project as good union contractors, we are providing certified payrolls. Anyone, but those payroll records go to the agencies. So, as long as the FOIL law permits you to get those records, I will say that I did try to get records for a PACT project, which is the housing project of the federal government. And there is an exemption in the federal law governing that does not require the records to be kept. So that was a little bit disappointing, but generally, I worked on the Javits project, and all the certified payrolls were going to New York for every single contractor. We maintained them all, and I think if anyone wanted to request them, they could.
Looking at them and evaluating. You run Javits too. Point is not that they're there, it's how do they evaluate them? Look at classifications, data right. It's not. It's misclassified in terms of what we're reporting. You run Javits, the whole building, okay? And what could be useful for prevailing wage strike. It's not a line. We could talk about it.
Okay. Yeah.
DA Bragg, is New York City, is Manhattan setting a precedent in its in the role it's playing in addressing, in enforcing prevailing wage and misclassification and wage theft? And is there something that other jurisdictions can learn from you and your office?
So I won't purport to have a complete holistic nationwide view. My general sense is that in the last decade or so, there's been stepped up enforcement, and the places that I would look to, it's sort of generally there are a number of attorney generals throughout the state that are doing that we partner with. When I was at the attorney general's office, I think at the local level in the district attorney's offices, there are not a lot of offices nationwide doing this kind of work, is my sense. In Manhattan, I always hesitate to say this because we are resource constrained and we have a lot of work to do, but we also, have more resources than a lot of smaller offices, which are, focused on sort of, daily street crime exclusively, because that's that takes up all of their resources. We have a very well-developed resources and very talented prosecutors focused on white-collar crimes broadly, and have dedicated significant resources to this. So, I think we do stand apart. One thing that I've tried to do at different stages in my career and as part of the DA's Association here, will certainly highlight our work. But do think, and I'm trying to not overstate it, but I do think that our work is stands apart from what we're seeing nationwide, and hopefully it will stand as a sort of a standard bearer, and other localities can go to their legislatures and get funding for this, and I think listen to and hear some of the arguments that David's making, that this enforcement in this is, and I think this is generally true about much of really all of our work, but you can really quantify it in the white collar space, right? So we get the money back, right? I mean, with our forfeitures, and you see this most prominently with our sort of big bank settlements from a decade ago, with millions and millions and millions of dollars that were then sort of reallocated to the city. So I don't want to say the work pays for itself, because I think that minimizes the impact of the work on the victims. But I think there is a strong case to be made that enforcement here has the ripple effect, that it's not curative. It's right, and we are coming in on the back end, but it is a ripple effect throughout various parts of our economies, and hopefully, again, really trying to level the playing field.
Rusty, do you want, or anyone else want to add to the challenge with data and tracking and access?
So I'll agree with the gentleman's point. I do think this is largely a data problem. And certainly that's why our project evolved the way it did, because we were having trouble accessing the data, and we didn't have the time horizon needed to follow through on a lot of our initial attempts at FOIL requests. So I do think opening that book so that it's easier for the public to get access to it will play a pretty prominent role in helping with enforcements. And that coupled with, I don't have the answer to this, but we did look into any sort of whistleblower protections or anonymous opportunities to provide information from job sites. Those things coupled together will begin to open up that universe of data that could answer these questions, again, very concretely and with real world numbers so that we don't need to continue to engage in our simulations.
You don't have to foil us. Share.
I love that.
Great.
There were a couple of
Yeah,
questions.
let's take another round of questions, please.
How you guys doing? In terms of, let's be clear, the workforce that we all speaking about specifically is marginalized workforce, right? So my question in terms of classification, misclassification, at my experience, I was an organizer for about eight years for the laborers. So in terms of misclassification, at what point does it become a misclassification? For example, you being paid as a laborer on the site and the owner tell you to go do a different jurisdiction of work, right? Which in turn should be a higher paid wage. So at that moment, you know, hey, you're a laborer, but I need you to go do something else for 2 hours. At what point is that actually a misclassification in respects to your pay increase? Because what I've been able to encounter, most folks don't know, and I believe that the jurisdictional side, or while a lot of these contractors are going non-union or not choosing to actually deal with the union because they're able to evade jurisdiction on these job sites. So my question is ultimately, at what point does it become a misclassification, right? If how much time is allotted in terms of them doing a different type of work and being paid with that, would you consider that to be a misclassification?
Next question. Yep. Go ahead.
Good morning. Dean Angelakos here with Greater New York Lesset. I ran the Bureau of Labor Law for Comptroller Thompson in his first term about 20 years ago, and I worked very closely with a number of the people in this room, many of the stakeholders. I don't want to make an advertisement. I could sit here for hours and talk about a lot of things we saw. Historically, both Manhattan DA's office and the Brooklyn DA's probably were the most aggressive in responding to the investigations that we sent over to your offices. One thing I just want to throw out there very quickly, again, I could ramble on for a long time, but traditionally and historically, there was a prevailing wage council that existed. The controller would preside over it. I sat there at the period of time, during that time. We had all the stakeholders from the local, state, federal, public agencies. We had all the trades in there, and we worked really in concert with one another. There were a lot of ideas that were tossed around, and there was nothing that we couldn't discuss that couldn't be brought to the controller's attention and to our Bureau of Labor Law attention. What I would ask is, if the city controller is not going to take that up again because it's been dormant for a while, I would ask you, and I think it would be in everyone's best interest, especially yours, if you could reconstitute or start a DA's Prevailing Wage Council to include all the stakeholders that previously existed.
Okay, one more question, please.
Hi, I'm Amy Law from the Comptroller's Office, actually. First, I just want to thank all the panelists here. This was a great report, and I'm really happy to be here. Just want to quickly let you know that there will be a Prevailing Wage Council set for November 30th, I believe. I'm not setting it up, but there will be invites that will be sent soon. I'm going to say afterwards if anyone has any questions to connect. I know our office with DA Bragg's office has communicated on possible collaborations together. Happy to talk more about that afterwards. But here for me as a supervising attorney in the Bureau of Labor Law, here to learn more about this research and trying to figure out ways to collaborate with everyone in the room, actually. Thank you. That was more of a comment than a question.
All right, we'll take one more question. Thank you.
Sorry. Cheers. Anyone?
Thank you. Jeff Grabelski with the Worker Institute at Cornell. And my question. My question is related to future research. And I think that the problem with data, among others, is that folks who are familiar with the construction industry understand that there's a vast underground economy that's operating in the industry where all kinds of violations, whether it's wage theft, prevailing wage violations, misclassification, health and safety violations. They go undetected because it is in the shadows. It's an underground economy. And it seems to me what's important is for us to think about how we can dig in more deeply to understand the dynamics of that underground economy and expose it in ways that it will inform the development of better policy interventions, better enforcement in ways that'll have a long-term impact on the industry going forward. And I think that's the fundamental problem when it comes to data. It's obviously not available because there are cheaters who are engaged in all kinds of unscrupulous business practices that are the prevailing standards in that underground economy. So I just think there's a question of here's my question, how can we better deploy the significant and considerable research capacities at the Cornell ILR School to partner with players who want to ensure that we can expose and dismantle that underground economy and then have much better enforcement and policy interventions to make this a better industry.
Wow, that's no small question, Jeff. Thank you very much. I think that's a great question, particularly for Ainsley and David.
Well, I think that we need to start having these conversations. I mean, this is the beginning, and I know Esther and I were talking about apprenticeship programs and doing something there, and I think that, again, we owe Eddie and Cornell ILR and Rusty and Anne Marie a huge thank you for starting this conversation. This is really important. Obviously, there's a lot of information here that can be shared and can be utilized. So I think, step one is here and now, and we have to keep it going.
I would agree with that. This is the beginning of a conversation that multifaceted. There's a lot to unpack here, and this is step one.
Well, I was just gonna on the Prevailing Wage Council say, looking forward to working with the Controller's Office. I assume you work together, but Claudia, your colleague, who I understand is primarily responsible for this work, the Controller's Office, a former colleague of mine from the Attorney General's office, and just will show you one of the best, labor enforcers I've worked with. So looking forward to that coordination. And I think that coordination is so key. This may seem to be sort of an odd comparison, but for the last 18 months, we've been sitting down. You mentioned like city, state, federal. I've actually worked as an enforcer in all three. And so I've seen my share of sort of disconnects and turf battles, and that's how stuff doesn't get done. We've been just, for example, sitting around the table every single day, city, state, and federal, on gun enforcement. And I think that's a big reason why we've seen that go down. So those are like concerted efforts. So just want to say, looking forward to working with the controller and that group. And we're doing, some of this, in our office already in terms of convening and talking with stakeholders.
Thank you. And I guess let's go back to the first question. At what point does misclassification happen? It's a murky world. How do we unpack that?
Well, happens on a lot of levels. So as you've heard, you have people that are paid to do one task, but they're actually doing another. It's very common to classify everyone at a lower class. Just as an example, let's say you have the lathers and the carpenters working, and they all will get classified as laborers, so because it's a lower wage. So they're being cheated, not only in their classification, but along with all the other stuff that's going on. Another example would be, let's see, there's so many scams out there. I'm trying to think if I have personally witnessed any. I guess that's the biggest way is you give somebody a classification that is not fitting, or you mix them up, which is you claim that they did X amount of hours at one job or title and X in another. So it's a very complicated formula, but it equals cheating.
I think your question is more the time, right? If you're doing something.
Do we know it's a violation, right? Like, with respect to that, do anyone know that? Like,
That I don't have an answer for.
Okay, but I think we need to be clear, mostly when we talk about misclassification, we talk about, because I don't want people to have a misunderstanding. Mostly when we talk about misclassification, we're talking about classifying an employee as an independent contractor on the construction site, which means they get no benefits, means they get a 1099 at the end of the year. And so I know, but misclassification. But let me just make it clear that the biggest issue, as I've seen, and actually there's a Cornell study on that, which we could make available to everybody, is that people are classified not as employees, and therefore they have no legal rights and they get no benefits at all. So that's another piece of the misclassification problem on construction sites.
So, and they're also misclassified as apprentices. So, the bottom line is misclassifying them in trades that are paid less than, so, a laborer is paid less than a plumber, so you're classifying them as a laborer, or you're classifying them as an apprentice when they're in fact, not doing apprentice work. But to your question is, we all know that somebody's going to say, can you help me do this, pick up this, take it over there, do that kind of work? And, how many, can you do that for 15 minutes, for an hour, for, my understanding, and Amy, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you might know this better than I, is that it's, for each hour worked. And certainly I know with respect to the wage and hour laws in New York, if you're spending more than 80% of your time, right? So there's a little bit of leeway, but certainly if you're spending 2 hours a day and you're working 8 hours, then you're being misclassified.
So, and I just want to add on to that. The reason I'm asking that, I know the answer to this question, but I was trying to look that we can extract it, that there'd be an influx of violations and cases that we could bring forward, because that happens that's so prevalent, right? So in terms of the legal side of that happens so much, 2 hours, an hour a day, a person is doing different jurisdiction of work. Those cases we'd be able to bring forward, a lot, because that's what's happening, right? They predominantly classified as one, they're doing 6, 7 hours there, but 1 hour a day, they got them doing something else, which they be on a higher pay, but being paid lower. Those cases that come up all the time.
Yeah. So I can say from my perspective as a sort of criminal case, there's some challenges there, but I think would make sense maybe if you got some time afterwards, connect you with the folks who do the work, and it would, for our, obviously we have the higher burden in the civil case and have to show kind of criminal intent. But if you're telling me, you said the sort of key word, which is one way we can show intent, if it's happening over and over and over and over again, there may be arguments that we can infer it. There may be some false business records. So if you got some time afterwards, maybe we can connect.
Let's take 2 more questions. We've got this woman in the front, and then Mike.
Hi, thank you. My question is related to developers and their contribution to this. So I'm interested to hear from the panel how you think developers can advocate for a prevailing wage and help minimize some of the situations that our organizer friend was talking about, and misclassification and wage theft, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, Mike? Right here.
I just had a couple of comments along the way as well. I think it's instructive that this sales panel was set up and the report was set up in connection with the concrete trades. We've just heard questions about classifications, and we have 5 or 6 different classifications on every concrete job. We have lathers, laborers, cement masons, carpenters, and we have 2 types of operating engineers. Back in my experience as an attorney, way back when I had cases like this, and you move guys around from place to place to place, it showed up as problematic. And the controller's office used to move on it. I don't know where the line is between a civil case on that issue and a criminal case, but I imagine with all the money involved, there's an intent. One more comment quickly. Members of my association, I'm the head of the Cement League, members of my association would normally bid on the high-rise superstructures that would be union on the prevailing wage. And with the infrastructure bill coming out, plans to rebuild around the west side, 34th Street, in that area, I've asked some of my key contractors if they're moving their business model towards prevailing wage. And most of them said that it's not a good idea for them, not because they can't do the work, because prevailing wage work is easy for a union contractor. All you'd have to do is do some certified payroll, but everything else is in line. What they're saying is that they're losing bids by 8 or 10%. So if we take Rusty's 13% average and add 8 or 10% on it, my guys think, where's the enforcement on it? And I guess my question would be if there's a preemptive way of announcing to the world that those deltas will be looked at in order to evaluate how the work is being performed. Because I think that's the shot. Mr. Bragg asked the question, where do we go from here? I think that was sort of the question. And I think where we have to go is not only a shot across the bow, sending a message that, there will be enforcement and the good contractors should bid on prevailing wage work, but also a message to the non-union world that if you're bidding on this work and you don't plan on doing it the correct way, we're going to be looking. So
Great, thank you.
I guess it's not really a question.
Any closing statements or in response to the question specifically, or Mike's comments?
Well, I can just say on that, I think going back to your earlier comments, one byproduct of doing the work is hopefully to get deterrence. We did a significant prevailing wage case earlier this year and tried to really lean into it. And so certainly am happy to continue to do that and do that with some specificity. Want to give some thought and talk to my communication folks about how best to do that. And then it sounds like the issue you flag is a great thing for maybe the first meeting of the Prevailing Wage Council. It does, as I sit here, particularly that level of specificity before there's a case does strike me as sort of more administrative and civil type of enforcement. It would be, at least in my experience, very challenging and would raise some issues, I think, to sort of a certain level of specificity preview a yet unformed criminal case, but having done some administrative and civil enforcement, and that could be something that we talk about on the council. So I think this is a very, lots of reasons for me to do these panels. One is to come back to the office with kind of rich ideas for potential enforcement. So the classification one we heard, and this with kind of I would say a drilling down on that issue a little bit more is something to take back. Closing thoughts, something I have to say that it's a bit of a non sequitur, but I haven't said it, which is, we're enforcing for all workers, regardless of immigration status. It is a sort of, a kind of fundamental point for our work. I guess the question was about research, but embedded in it was sort of the folks in the shadows. A big part of what we're doing is going out and doing across all of our work, community outreach and touching people and letting them know we're here and to come forward. And so for all of our cases, we're making that point about immigration status. So and it's not a big macro closing point, but
It's an important one, though.
but one I wanted to make sure to say. So thank you for having me.
I think I can tie somewhat of an answer, but I don't know that there really is an answer to your question. We would really like to have developers involved. And I think, one way we'll be doing that is by hopefully, with enforcement and certainly with agencies, we want to make sure that you're using that developers from agencies to private developers getting some public assistance in projects, that you're not just looking at the actual bottom line number, and that we're educating everybody that number is just a number and that there are lots of other extraneous costs that have to be looked at when you're making the ultimate decision. But it's really about cycles, right? It's a cycle of poverty, or if it's a cycle of raising people up, and we're looking to get everyone, all stakeholders involved in a cycle that raises everyone up.
I'll add to that. I think the developers, they're our partners in construction, but we care about different things. So the union cares about the workers' rights. We care about fair wages. We care about safety. The developers prioritize, I guess, profits a little more than we would. So really, I believe that it would be on our side, on the government side and the union side, to kind of lay out the groundwork and the framework that they have to follow versus I doubt they'll come along as willingly as we would like them to come. So it's more of us putting barriers or things in place that would secure our rights versus expecting them to do the right thing. And then closing thoughts. If we want to stop the cycle of poverty, if we want to uplift the city, if we want to do good things, put money in the hands of the working class, because nobody spends money like the working class. We go to a bar, we buy a $5 beer, we leave a $5 tip. Doesn't make sense, but that's what we do. So if you want the economy to move, you need money spent, and the working class do that.
Rusty?
Yeah, so in response to the question on the role for developers, I think Aislinn said it best. This report is a lot about shifting perceptions. There's this rooted perception that an open shop is just naturally going to be 20 to 30% cheaper. That shows up often in bids where you see the lowest bidder, often being an open shop. So I think to change that perception, a role for developers is for us as researchers, to Jeff's point as well, to begin collecting stories from those developers who have gotten burned by that, who have chosen the lowest cost bidder and only to see the project experience tons of cost overruns and change order requests, to have those records and collect them somewhere and put them side by side or in juxtaposition with some of the results that we were able to create here. And hopefully we'll continue to create as we dig into some of the data on this. I think that's one of the big roles that we can have, is just sharing those stories so that other developers can look at that experience and then begin to evaluate in a more holistic way who they're choosing for a job.
All right, well, I want to thank our panel very much today for joining us and for your insight and perspective. And then we'll close out with Patricia Campos Medina.
Thank you very much, everyone. Another round of applause to our panelists. Thank you, Rusty and Anne-Marie, for this great collaboration here at the Worker Institute, and Dr. Patricia Campos Medina, and the Executive Director of the Worker Institute here at ILR Cornell. And we are, I'm always proud to say that we are the premier labor education and research center for unions and workers in New York State and the country. And we're very proud to bring together academic researchers, practitioners, labor unions, worker advocates to think together what are the critical issues affecting workers and how we can find solutions to drive forward policy innovation with our policymakers. So this effort, together with the Worker Institute, the Buffalo Collab, and the ILR School, and our friends in the labor movement, is to do specifically that. What is the problem? What is this potential solution? How we can create that partnership together to drive policy and solutions, which include supporting the enforcement part of policy and legislation. So, I was reading briefly, why does research matter? Yes, research matters because it gives us information to think about solutions. It also gives us information to change the narrative. That's what Rusty was talking about. The narrative from the developers, of those who are building beautiful buildings in New York City. I walk around New York City and I see these big skyscrapers, and I'm always amazed the talent that it takes to build those. But my first question is like, I hope those workers are safe up there, or that no another person dies. Because right here in New York City, the numbers of fatalities in construction sites had gone up for 2022 by 10%. And I was looking at the numbers. It says that in 2022, 751 construction-related accidents. That's 751 families impacted in New York City. 551 debilitating injuries. That's 551 workers who right now are injured at home collecting workers' compensation. That's another 151 families. 22 fatalities, 22 deaths just last year in New York City. 17 of those deaths were in non-union shops. And that's why when we think about that, and we think about research, when we think about why this work matters, it's because it impacts people's lives. There is a big, an old song that I was listening to during the Labor Day weekend. There is a song by a famous cantor that basically says that, and it's a construction worker, and it says, I came here to work. I didn't come here to die. And I think that that's what we have to remember when we do the work about prevailing wage, when we fight for having a union shop versus an open shop. And what we have to remind those developers who are refusing and want to play with the books and tell put a bid that misclassifies people, because they do. That's how they put shadows in their payroll. They hire people to do something and they put them to do something else. We have to remind them and change the narrative that this is not about the union boss. This is not about just numbers. This is actually about people's lives. So I wanted to leave you with that, because the work that we do to advance workers' rights is to save workers' lives. So thank you for this partnership, and thank you for continuing to seek us out to help inform and help translate data into new ideas, into policy, and give you the tools for you to go out there and take action to save people's lives. Thank you so much for being at the Worker Institute and for always joining us in our corner.